Hey, welcome back to the Confidad Podcast. My name is Dan, your host, and I'm so grateful to have you joining us today as we dive a little bit deeper into the time well spent method. Quick shout out to my buddy Chris Schuster of Schuster Sound, who created that custom music for the podcast. Thank you, Chris. Really appreciate what you add to this podcast. We'll begin today, like we do every episode, with our fatherhood mindset. Say it out loud with me. I'm the only one who can fulfill the father role I have, so I choose to do it well. I get to show up well for my kids. Imperfection is reality. Ownership is a choice. Today is brand new, and so is tomorrow. I am wholly loved, so I will love wholly. Today, we're going to talk about the third concept within the time well spent method. And it's a little bit more ethereal, a little bit more 30,000 foot. And I want to talk about it in a way that can help you start to grasp. What does it look like to know my kids? What does it look like to spend 5 minutes once a day knowing my kids? Understand that the more that we spend time seeing our kids and the more the time that we spend hearing our kids, the better we will get to know them, right? Imagine it like a triangle. Knowing is at the top, and at the bottom of either side of the triangle is seeing and hearing. Over all these three concepts, being present in the moment matters, okay? We've talked about presence. We talked about being content in where we are in our fatherhood journey and how that can lead us to being present. Contentment is the pathway to presence. And what undergirds all three of these concepts is a thing called integrated neuro pathways. And so there's a concept in a book called The Yes Brain, where it talks about when we're spending time engaging with our kids and both of our quote unquote yes brains are turned on, it starts to integrate neuro pathways, meaning neural pathways are like well-worn paths within the neurons in your brain that it's like when habits become, you don't think about them, they just become how you act, right? And then your action becomes your life. That's what we're talking about here. So as we implement this 3 times a day, 5 minutes for each kid, it starts to integrate these neural pathways. And what happens is you could be a guy who maybe you would never admit this out loud to anyone, but you don't really love being around your kids. I had a dad tell me once he'd rather stay at work late. He would rather work late and come home just in time to tuck his kids in bed and give them a kiss so that he could A, provide for them, meaning make more money, and then B, avoid the reality that when he goes home, it's a totally different perspective than when he's the boss at work. Everyone at work listens to him, respects him, understands that he's the one that writes the paychecks, and so they respond well to him because of his power and his control and his leadership. I'm not saying those things in a negative sense, like that's just the reality. But to go home to his kids, he didn't have much power, control, or leadership because it always was whining, screaming, and chaos. And so he said, I feel bad, but I'd rather just be at work and then come home last minute, tuck him in. And if that's you, what we can do is by starting to do this slowly, 1% better every day, like integrate it slowly throughout the next few weeks, is it starts to make the neural pathways become integrated when you're spending time seeing, hearing, and knowing your kid. And actually, they start to look forward to having you around, and you look forward to those little windows throughout the day to be fully present with them. Okay, so that's the goal, kind of where we're going, how to get there, these 3 5-minute windows once a day, and then also being present, like fully present, like we talked about in the last couple of episodes. So we said seeing requires proximity, meaning being on their level, being in their world, entering into their life as they see it. Hearing requires prompting, like those open-ended questions, and posture, how you're showing up for those moments of listening. And the last, knowing requires perspective. And the perspective that you get by seeing and hearing them is what equips you to show up well for the knowing, okay? What it looks like is how you take what you're learning in the seeing and the hearing moments and integrating that into the knowing. So you can hear your kids say something like, I've never tried Indian food, or I've never tried Mexican food, or I've never tried fill in the blank. And you hear them say that earlier in the day or days before. And in this time of knowing, you're like, hey, I heard you the other night when you said you wanted to try Indian food, and I know that that's something you're interested in. Let's come up with a time to go try it. Or we got ingredients to make our own chicken tikka masala tonight and naan bread. Would you like to help out? And so then they understand that they are heard and that they are seen, and you're getting to know them a little better because you're taking what you're learning and you're integrating that in to the time that you're spending with them. There's a concept that I want us to help wrap our minds around, maybe change our perspective when it comes to knowledge, okay? There's a traditional rabbinic saying that goes something like this. Knowledge is having all the correct answers, and wisdom is knowing the right questions to ask. Say it one more time. Knowledge is having all the correct answers, while wisdom is knowing the correct questions to ask. The idea is, do we think we know our kids? Because if we think we know them, if we think that we already have it all figured out with them, then we're kind of putting a period on the relationship. We're saying, yep, it's done. I know you. And we're done. Like, it's just, now we're just going to exist in this family, in this home, and in our lives based on my assumption or my knowledge that I have about you. That's why open-ended questions are so important, because it's actually a wiser way to approach the relationship that you have with your kids. And so instead of putting them in a box, or instead of saying, I know you, and it's just period, end of sentence, what if we said things like, I know a lot about you, but I'd really love to know more? Because even if you know your kid better than anyone else, okay, so you're executing on a high level as a parent and you know them better than anyone else, guess what? In 2 weeks, they will have had experiences with their peers or at school or wherever it is that changes who they are, because they are continuing to grow. They are continuing to become adults, become who they are meant to be. And so are we willing to take time to get to know them more and more ongoing, and staying flexible enough in the way that we see them, hear them, and know them, that we go, yeah, you are different than you were. Now, we know in psychology that personality is pretty well developed by the age of 5, okay? So once your kid is 5, their personality is pretty well formed, and they're going to operate within that personality in different ways of expressing that personality. But that core personality is pretty set in stone by the time they're 5. But that doesn't mean that they're going to always, quote unquote, be the same kid from 5 years on and older. And I think about this for those that have multiple kids. It can feel like a lot to handle. It can feel like a lot to juggle and master. And the idea here is not that you become the best parent and there's some formula to implement, because parenting is more like an artful skill to master than it is some sort of formula to implement. We've seen this in so many different instances where you read the parenting book and you apply it and it works for one kid, but it doesn't work for the other. What's wrong with you? You're a terrible dad. No, kids cannot be raised all the same. I had a friend of mine once say, well, I raised them all the same and they turned out so different. Well, yeah, because they're not the same kid. They're not the same human being. And so we need to be artful in our skill of parenting in a way that can be flexible enough to adapt and change and move, so that our knowing our kids informs the way that we raise them. It informs our discipline. It informs our vision casting. It informs the way that we wrestle with opportunities that we give them. It should inform everything about our relationship as we talk about building this bridge between them and us. Okay? Let me give you an example of what it looks like to know your kid in a way that it can change what happens in your family's life. So our oldest was like, hey, spoiler alert, there's a Santa spoiler in the story. So if you're listening with your kids, heads up. Our oldest, when he was probably 4, was like, hey, so you're telling me this strange man walks into our house, and we didn't have a fireplace, so there's no chimney for him to come down, right? He gets into our house without a key. We've never seen him before. He leaves presents, and then he leaves without a trace. And he was really, really scared about Santa Claus. And so he was like waking up in the middle of the night for several days leading up to Christmas time. And we finally had to be like, well, do we tell him? And we decided, because his safety and security and ability to sleep was more important than maintaining some tradition. It meant that we told him what was really going on. Now, he calmed right down and he was fine with it. The problem was then not letting him tell everyone else and his little brothers and his cousins and all the kids at school. And so fast forward now to where he's 12 and our youngest is about the age he was. And he has maintained the tradition with us because he understands that there's beauty and magic in that tradition for a kid who it fits, right? And the other example I want to use is understanding that sometimes the needs that your kids have are greater than you have resources for on your own. One of our kids was really struggling with anger, and we could not figure out what was going on, why he was getting so angry, and all these outbursts, because he was such a kind and considerate kid most of the time. But then when he would get angry, it was like, watch out. Well, we realized in the whole chaos of having 4 kids in the family and 2 of them under 2 and all this stuff, he was going crazy because he was having a lack of attention. Now, this sounds like maybe our kid was becoming the center of our lives, which he wasn't, but we needed to let him lead a little bit. So we ended up going to parent-child interactive therapy, PCIT, and finding out that we were the problem, actually, not him, and being able to move through that with intention, with humility, with swallowing our pride and being like, we need to show up well for this one so that he can learn how to regulate his emotions in a much better way. And so we didn't just raise them all the same. We haven't just raised them all the same. We've tailored our parenting differently depending on the needs of each kid. But that requires knowing your kid well enough to know what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, knowing yourself well enough to know what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses. Where should I be asking for help in the art of parenting? Because if you don't know your strengths and you don't know your weaknesses, you're going to really struggle to grow and become the dad that your kids need. So part of the way that this knowing is lived out is through play, like adventure, right? Our family culture framework builders. Adventure, service, contribution, and connection. When you start to know your kids in these little 5-minute windows, it starts to inform the overall culture of your family. And so as we move deeper into the family culture framework in the coming episodes, it'll be really key to understand that like the time well spent method, seeing, hearing, and knowing your kids is the foundation that we build the family culture framework upon. Because if you are missing one of those legs of the stool, one of those legs of the triangle, the seeing, the hearing, or the knowing, it makes it really wobbly and it makes it less secure for moving into the future, because maybe you're just an authoritarian control guy who's like, oh, we're going to have a vision, we're going to do this thing, and it's going to be amazing. And then you just take off without letting your kids inform the culture of your family, inform the actions that you're taking, inform the adventure that you're going on or the service projects that you are a part of, okay? So knowing your kids is a helpful thing when understanding their role in the family and their community as well. We say it takes a village to raise a family, but how many of us are out there raising our hands asking for the help that you need? Let's make it normal to ask for the help that we need, because instead of standing on some fake facade strength of I'm a great dad, what if we actually had the guts? What if we actually manned up and said, I need help. I need to understand my kids more and I don't know how to do it and I need help. Will you help me? That's what a good dad does. He swallows his pride and he allows himself to go through the hardship of growing the weak parts of him as a dad. And this knowing piece can be a really solid way of understanding your weaknesses as a dad. So, to empower you a little bit today, let's do a thought exercise. I want you to take, after you finish this episode, if you're driving or whatever, I want you to write out each of your kids' names, and then underneath of them, I want you to write a character, like a character strength that they have. Honesty, integrity, service, others-focused, love, justice-oriented. Like, what are the things that make your kid, each one of them, what makes them them? And then under that, what are the kind of activities that you know they love to do more than anything else? Whether it's sports or art or music or whatever, it doesn't matter. The idea is, let's take some intentional time understanding who your child is, jotting it down, and start to build up this knowledge base within yourself that can help you then lead your kids into the family culture framework, into a family that they are proud to be a part of, into a team. So I hope you feel empowered today. Go ahead and jot those things down. Write their names, the character pieces of them, and the activities based on those characteristics of them. And then we'll be able to take those pieces as we move forward through the course and understand more and more how knowing your kids informs the way that you lead them. Here's to becoming the dad that your kids need. We'll see you in the next episode.